Hello and welcome to Topical Idiocy, where we are two stupid people tackling questions too smart for us to answer. My name is Shlok, and I'm joined by my co-host Aarman. And Aarman, could you tell the listeners to this podcast what the question is?
So, taking a break from actually talking about the Democratic primary and more of candidates and more like what you'd see on the news, we thought of taking a more abstract approach and talking about why the political process has yielded disappointing candidates. Now, I've seen this question come up a lot recently with the Democratic primary closed and people complaining that we wish there were more options, or we wish there was this person running or this person running in the presidential campaign. Now, we thought of focusing instead on the side of Congress, since many of these candidates have passed through either the House or the Senate before running for president, and seeing how really the candidates, the representatives that we see in the legislature, why are these the candidates that are supposed to represent us? And so I think starting off with this question, I think it would also be like, Shlok, why do we think that the candidates are actually disappointing?
Well, I mean, it's really a meta question, right? I mean, as you were saying, the question comes up a lot in sort of recent times, but it's been coming up over political history, especially in this country and usually around presidential elections, because we look at candidates and we're consistently disappointed by a lot of the sort of decisions that are made in the country. But I know you asked me the question, and before I answered the central question, because obviously I have the answer to it for some reason, before that happens, I think we should first contend with the idea of whether the premise is correct, right? Like, is it
whether candidates are actually disappointing versus is this just our own sentiment that we as young people have?
Exactly. And there are definitely statistically correct ways to deal with this and to understand if this is true or not. And that's something we're definitely going to get into. But the way that I've sort of determined this and the way that I sort of think about this question is I think about what politics and politicians are supposed to accomplish over the course of their careers. And that's the correct governance and the correct sort of maintenance of society, right? And in recent times, seeing all of these crises that have been happening, be it like the 2008 financial crisis or, you know, the 2016 election or
even more recently, just the
COVID pandemic and just
COVID pandemic and like with what's happening with George Floyd.
Absolutely. And so the fact that, and like these things may seem disconnected, but they're all sort of symptoms of just a society that doesn't have political checks, and they don't have political balances that work in the favor of citizens, and they don't have politicians that have the correct incentives, right? Because if we had better politicians, we would have better checkups on the police and everything and all of that. But this is all very topical and everything, and I probably just spoke for a little too long, but
that's fine.
But I mean, essentially, the long of the short of it is no. I think that candidates are disappointing, and that was weird. Yes, I think candidates are disappointing. Yes, I think the politicians that we have are disappointing, and I think that we have a broken process. What do you think?
Well, I think, like as you said, many of these big issues that have faced us as a nation have largely gone barely addressed. People are still unsatisfied with what happened with the bailouts of 2008. People are right now unsatisfied with the government's response to the COVID crisis. And even just looking at many of the current issues Americans feel passionate about, for example, gun control and climate change, which have an overwhelming support of Americans across both sides of the political spectrum, no one seems willing to want to tackle this. True. And no one seems really treating the issue with the same amount of passion that so many Americans do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it's just, so I guess we're both in agreement that the political process has yielded disappointing candidates, and it's something that I think, I mean, I don't know, people go around sort of saying that, like, you know, the whole system is rigged and politicians suck and all of that. And that sort of sentiment is kind of espoused a lot. And we see that a lot every time an election happens. At least I see that in my friends and whatever. And it's, I feel like that's kind of an unproductive sentiment to have, because it takes the sort of agency that you have as a voter out of your own hands. But in some cases it is kind of true, which is unfortunate. But
Yeah.
I think it's important to, like, let's talk about some data, I guess. I mean, to back up what we're talking about. I guess that would be kind of,
Yeah, I think that's fair.
yeah.
So like what we've been seeing is really just a complete lack of distrust of the government. For example, with only 17 Americans trusting the actual federal government. That is a bad state to be in for a democracy, a healthy democracy. And also just since we're focusing on Congress, like over the past 10 years or 5 elections in the House of Representatives, Congress's approval rating has never been above 30%.
Yeah.
And you would think this would startle most politicians, and yet it doesn't. If anything, they treat it with a sort of complacency and a sort of normality. Oh, this is what we have, deal with it.
Yeah.
And mainly people just say, like, if you want to change the system, vote. But when we were discussing this before, one of the central reasons, just going into the reasons why we think we have this system, is, in my opinion, primaries matter so much more than the general election.
This is definitely true. Yeah.
And what we've been able to see from like changes in ideology of the actual party has best come from primaries. Whether we see that on the Tea Party side, or whether we see that, back in 2010 and 2011, just the really the coup of the Tea Party over the Republican Party, to even right now, we're seeing the Democratic Party going further left and left, as AOC, as Ayanna Pressley, as many Democratic progressive insurgents are winning primaries,
I mean,
or at least making it competitive.
to break that down, right? The reason why the primaries kind of matter more than the general is that usually, like, people have already decided what party they're going to vote for, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were talking to me earlier, I think outside of the podcast, about how there's always like the vote blue no matter what, and that's becoming a very like pertinent kind of not movement per se, but at least messaging that
And
people,
mentality, I think, more than anything else.
for sure. And whether it's like a positive thing or not is up for debate, because on the one hand it definitely accomplishes a goal, right? Because it makes everyone very focused. On the other hand, it takes the agency out of like who you're actually voting for. It doesn't matter after a while. But in the primary, that's when you have choice, right? Because that's when you have the different representation. But I just want to point out another study before we go on, where it was just another study done by the Pew Research Center, and it said that only 17% of the American people trust the government. So having those two statistics put together, 30% approve of the Congress, 17% trust the government. The majority of the American people either don't care for or don't trust the American government and their legislative body. And it's that's a little concerning, I think.
And you can also see, like, with turnout, as a result of people's lack of trust and people's lack of faith in the process, they just don't show up. And can you blame them if you don't think your Congress is working for you?
You definitely can blame them, can't you?
Well, I think that we can get into that a little bit later, but just...
It's a cyclical thing, right? If you don't turn out to vote, you're not going to vote for the people that you care for, right? But I mean, it's an interesting debate that I hope we get to have. But yeah.
And I think, again, going back to just more of like analyzing why this is happening, we were talking about the tenure of party leadership over time. And so what we're seeing right now in recent years is newer members of Congress, or even just insurgents, are facing tougher re-election bids because of the amount of congressmen wanting to stay for over 12 years, for example. And even though we're seeing more challenges more people challenging incumbents, largely out of 2016, and at least on the Democratic side, we're seeing very few people and congressmen step aside. And I remember just seeing one of the graphs we were talking about in which they analyzed each the aggregate representatives who stayed for, I think it was like 0 to 6 years, 6 to 12, and then 12 plus. And only until recently has congressmen who have stayed in the legislature past 12 years existed.
Yeah.
So this is like quite a new phenomenon. And what we're seeing as a result is that it is so hard to get new faces in Congress.
Yeah, people just don't want to leave.
Yeah.
Being a congressman is just such a fun job that and it's terrible for progress. It's terrible for political movement and political change, because even though we'd love to believe that the same person can represent the varied interests of a society over time, I mean, it's almost too good to be true, right? Like if you're a person who was representing, your district in the 1980s, and you had like a real pulse on what people were believing and thinking, it's kind of unlikely, right, that in the 2000s or the 2010s you're going to be able to represent them in the same way,
Mm-hmm.
And
And
like,
also, as we see, like the number of people each House of Representatives, each representative represent in the House of Representatives, it is now around 600,000.
yeah,
Going back to like even just like a century ago, that number was much smaller. And so seeing just the population growth and the number of people representatives are representing,
yeah,
it kind of makes you wonder just how in touch with these people are they, and how in touch could they ever be?
absolutely, yeah, for sure. So I mean, I think we've established at least uh, definitively that the candidates that we have are disappointing, and not many people trust the candidates that they do get eventually. Not many people trust the politicians they do get, and the barriers to entry are also sort of there. So one of them is tenure, right, that we've been talking about, right, like how long a politician will stay in office. But another major one is cost. Now, this is something that I think you can definitely speak more to, because I think you know sort of more about this topic. But I think just about like the millions that are spent in races, and I mean there were like what is it? I guess in 2018 was when AOC was elected. And AOC was one of the few politicians that, I mean, even though there was a broader movement that a bunch of, young progressive Democrats were being elected to represent the state, I would really want to look into that to see just how many Democratic politicians that were elected were new, if you get what I'm saying. Like,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was just a narrative that was pushed or the actual truth. But in that, I mean, could you continue with that point? I just have to just hold on.
Yeah. Well, just looking at the actual amount of money spent on races, uh, for the amount of money spent by a winning candidate in a House race was $1.3 million, and for a senator, it was on average $10.4 million. And to think about, for example, with a representative raising $1.3 million every other year, and having to constantly face that pressure of raising enough money to keep your campaign going is huge. Um, and so looking at just in 2016, 95.4% of House elections were won by the candidate that spent the most. And that's huge. Again, 95.4% of elections were determined by those who made the most money, not by close calls of elections, but just who fundraised, not who appealed to the most voters, but who appealed to really big money interests. And so looking at like where this money goes to, for instance, in a campaign, people, you need that campaign infrastructure, and that means people conducting polling, people doing campaign strategy, organizing events, managing social media, reaching out to media outlets, and collecting even more donations. Really, there's a lot of roles a campaign has to fulfill. And what we're seeing is how incumbents are like constantly able to raise that million plus sum, whereas insurgents obviously have a hard chance because they don't have the established donor connections. They don't have billionaires they're appealing to. They're starting everything from scratch.
Yeah, no, it's true. Sorry about the weird cutoff. What had happened was that my dad just started yelling my name, and I like muted the thing, and so I didn't want to. So hey, candid thing in the podcast. No, but yeah, absolutely, it's a total problem. I think you talked about the DCCC. Have you already about
No, I
how?
have not. No.
Well, I mean, that's a big problem as well, right? The DCCC, they take in funds over the year and they redistribute it at election times to fund the campaigns of incumbent Democratic candidates. So they're almost disincentivizing anyone to even run against a Democrat in a primary,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that disincentivizes, change, like actual change, and that's a real problem. And like incumbency, and maintaining that tenure and maintaining that high cost and high barrier to entry is a genuine problem on both sides because it lessens the room for actual conversation, and it just makes it more of maintaining the status quo, if you know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And just going back to the DCCC's influence. Well, the DCCC is the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And so that's the arm of the Democratic National Committee that focuses on winning House elections. And so what they've done in recent years, since uh, in 2019, after AOC and Ayanna Presley won, and a few other progressives won their historic victories against long-serving incumbents, the DCCC started a policy of blacklisting political consulting firms for working against incumbents in primaries. And so what that means now is that consulting firms that have some experience running a campaign and have experience with the aforementioned things we talked about with conducting polling and strategy now are much less likely to work with insurgents challenging incumbents because they fear for their jobs. Because if they don't win, then the DCCC will make sure that no incumbent can work with them.
Yeah.
And so when we are seeing the DCCC essentially meddle in elections, in primaries, and not even make it seem like there's a fair chance, how do we get new faces and how do we hear new voices in Congress? It's really hard, it seems.
Yeah.
And we see also just they control hundreds of millions of dollars that they can see where elections go. And from a establishment sense, it makes sense. You don't want money to be wasted in a primary when that money could go to the general election. But we're not talking about a party maintaining power. We're talking about parties and politicians representing people.
This is really dry. Holy cow.
Do
I'll
you want to
cut.
pause it?
Yeah, I'll pause this. Or I'll cut it out anyway.
Okay. So I'll introduce the topic.
Cool. 3. So this is the new recording. All the previous stuff you heard was
Garbage.
the worst. Ooh, that was terrible. All right. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to Topical Idiocy, where you've got two idiots talking about topics too smart for them to handle. My name is Shlok, and I'm joined by my co-host, Aarman. And today's topic is... What is today's topic, Aarman?
In the previous podcast, we talked a lot about the disappointing candidates we see and analyzing why they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this episode, we wanted to talk about really just finding solutions to the genuine and disappointment that people feel about congressional politicians.
Yeah. And so that's going to include, so in preparation for this, we decided to prepare a lot of data in preparation. Prepare. Oh my God. Okay, but we, already this is much better. But we decided to prepare a lot of data for this episode because we thought, what could idiots do to try to at least try
Sounds smart, yeah.
to sound smart? That's what we're always trying to do. Um, but a lot of this data is really, really dense, and it's hard to paint a picture that can put something coherent together, right? Because we know that this is a problem. We know that people not engaging in their own kind of political process leads to worse political candidates because there's no like political check on anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to figure out another way to use political as like an adjective. But yeah, I mean, we can just go through the data. We've got it on like this little Google Doc, real fancy. But yeah. So I don't know if I mentioned this in the last podcast or not specifically, but like there's a lot of discussion about podcasts, and there's a lot of discussion about, or not podcasts, sorry, there's a lot of discussion about politics amongst American homes. But those numbers are a little lower than what you'd expect, especially considering that, at least whenever I check like Twitter, it feels like we're in like a political, like hellscape,
Mm-hmm.
like all the time. That's what's on everyone's minds. But according to a 2018 poll by peoplepress.org, about 51% of Americans talk about politics weekly. And it doesn't actually, 51% talking about politics weekly doesn't really translate to political engagement, right? It doesn't mean that they're
Mm-hmm.
donating. It doesn't mean that they're, voting, especially. But still, talking about politics I'd say it's a significant thing. But, well, I mean, continuing on that trend, right? Like, when it came to civic and political knowledge, which I personally think is a lot more important because that
Mm-hmm.
is
This is about making the most informed choices, or like having the background to make the most informed choices.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think we've seen enough of those like Jimmy Kimmel videos where he'll go around and ask people,
Yeah.
right? You've seen that on the boardwalk.
Yeah.
Then people will like say that they don't know what like the First Amendment is or what like USA stands for or whatever. And like truly, it's just Americans making a fool of themselves. But apparently, 86% of Americans knew the First Amendment, which is good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is okay. I mean, 75.
Depends.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it just depends on like our expectations, of course.
True. Yeah. Is that higher or lower than what you think it would have been?
Personally, I thought it was going to be lower.
Okay, sure.
So like, I'm feeling better about this.
So you had very low expectations, but yeah, I mean, I really would like to know how they. This is just away from the actual thing, but I would like to know how these people articulated what the
Mm-hmm.
amendment is. Because if they
Yeah,
just
I would.
like, I can say what I want, then it's like,
Like technically, sure, but
you're right. You're right.
if it's like reciting the actual First Amendment, like
Yeah,
I don't even think I can do that.
that's true. Another thing is 75% can name the political party in control of the House and the Senate. For a while, that was actually pretty easy because it was the same party. But I think in 2018, it would have been the same. 54% know that the vice president cast the tie-breaking vote in a deadlocked Senate. That's a very specific question to ask.
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting just because, like Mike Pence, for instance, has really utilized that role pre-2016 to 2018 just because of how close it was. So I think like that's interesting because usually you don't see that. But just going on with the other ones, like going on to more general knowledge of, I guess like civic knowledge, a lot of this stuff would be on for example, the citizenship test. And so for people who are not born in the U.S. and who have to actually like take a test for the citizenship to actually have citizenship in the United States, a lot of these questions are like need to knows, and they go even into more specifics. Like I remember one of them was about naming 3 founding fathers, and it's actually like kind of hard, I would say.
Yeah.
Like if you, I
George
think since
Thomas Jefferson, and is Ben Franklin a founding
I
father?
think Ben Franklin is one. Since Hamilton, it's gotten easier, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's I feel like people who actually had to earn the citizenship have to have better civic engagement or civic
Oh,
knowledge than.
yeah, for sure. Citizens that become naturalized and everything, the process they go through. I mean, you need to know more. I think it's true. Like,
Mhm.
I definitely know. Well, I don't know. I'd give myself credit, but I guess, I don't know. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think when you are not proactively engaged with, like civics as a subject, especially like in a country where you have a lot of other things to worry about, then,
Mhm.
why would it ever cross your mind? And it
Yeah.
doesn't immediately come to mind, right? Like why this knowledge would be important, but
Mhm.
a lot of decisions are like foundational upon civics. It's important
Mhm.
to have it's important to know your First Amendment when your rights are being challenged. It's important to know the Second Amendment when we talk about gun rights and everything, because this is
Mhm.
part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Like gun rights, whether you're shoot, was I talking about this with you? It was what was the thing called?
No, I don't think this was with me.
It was not constitutionalist. It's the word for when you stick to the exact like frame the words of the Constitution.
Oh,
What is that called?
oh my God. Contextualists.
Contextualist. That's it. Very good. So yeah, contextualist. So I mean, like whenever those kinds of conversations happen, then it's important to become politically literate, because then you can learn about things, right? Like if someone talks
Mhm.
about like the Second Amendment, like when I was in high school and I was surrounded by a lot of woke people, they would just kind of
Mhm.
like snap their hands and slap their fingers. I'm not human. I don't know how to do this, but like they would kind of just talk about like the emotions of it and not get into the logical arguments of why guns are, of
Mhm.
why people should have guns, should not have guns. So the context of that matters.
Yeah, and I think also just the public education system doesn't necessarily like help with this. Even like I just remember my like I don't just my like high school classes and like middle school classes on history. It's not on how like there's not too much of a focus on politics so much as it's like I guess history. um,
I mean, okay, yeah, sorry, go ahead. I have something I'll respond, but
no, go ahead, go ahead.
no, my question to that is like, how do you think they could do that without being political, right? I mean, like, you don't want to force a point of view on anyone
True.
because that's
No, and
hard.
I think that's also interesting because what we see, like different states have their own versions of textbooks,
Which
of the
is
same textbooks,
it's
which
so
is insane.
yeah.
And like, for example, I was speaking just with a friend from Alabama.
What's
Um,
yeah, sorry.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, but he was saying just how big of a focus states' rights was when they were learning about the Civil War. Was like I took a course just last year on the Civil War, and one of the first things we talked about was dispelling the myth of states' rights in causes of the Civil War. And so having these two, for example, just with like as hot button of an issue as
Yeah.
racism is in this country and how really the U.S. still hasn't grappled with its legacy, to see two just different ways of teaching arguably one of the most important periods of American history.
Oh, it's so states' rights, you're saying, was a cause of the Civil War or was not a cause?
I'm saying that how I was taught, it
No, no,
was
no. I know.
not.
I mean, I know how you were. But like, because like that's basically how the school we went to would teach that class. But I'm saying that like in actuality, do you know whether it's true or not, or is it?
Well, I think ooh, we could have an entire podcast episode on that.
Is that
Um,
I mean, we should. That would be kind of fun.
we could.
No one would
I,
listen, but
no, I think it definitely had. Like I think it's so many people imagine the same sort of unity the United States has right now as present in the 1800s and even in like the late 1700s, when truly we were a nation of states back then. And so I think that part often gets overlooked.
Right.
And I do think the main point was about slavery. That being said, on the civics exam, one of the acceptable answers for the causes of the Civil War, not only slavery is one of them, but also states' rights.
It's kind of
Um,
insane.
yeah, I don't think the biggest factor was states' rights. I think that was just more to the culture
Yeah.
of the time.
Because that's also a thing that, like, and no offense to your friend, I'm sure your friend is great, but it's a thing that, like, I feel like I've heard like Bill O'Reilly or something say where it's like the Civil War was not about. I don't know why I'm doing a Trump kind of thing, but like I don't know what Bill O'Reilly sounds. I don't listen to him a lot, but like
Well,
Bill,
he's gone.
no, his show was just bought by Viacom.
Really? Wait, I thought he had the whole sexual assault allegations.
He did, but now he was doing his online show where it was just him in like his underpants and like polo. No joke, just him ranting at like his laptop. Which who are we to like judge that, right? We can't judge that, but
We can't judge that. No.
but like he he then put his thing, but now Viacom CBS has bought it, and so he's back. You can't put down the bill, even though you probably want to. Definitely don't want this guy on air because he's terrible. But I feel like it's the thing that like Bill O'Reilly or like Sean Hannity or one of those kind of like
Yeah,
uh,
it's
the cases would say.
that's where you still see the like profound distrust of the federal government and this embrace of many conservatives is many conservatives is embrace of local government.
Yeah.
The whole notion of states' rights being so fundamental.
I mean, if you
Um,
can't even believe there's that, but if you can't even like agree on an actual history of your country,
yeah,
how could you even move forward? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do
no,
you?
it's a genuine question.
Yeah, because like I have friends in Texas who are like, we just learn about Texas. That's all we do, which is like,
I remember in like primary school learning about like only New York history, and that was just my conception of the world back then. It was just New York, and that's it.
my God, yeah. This is I know I don't know if I should say this right now, but apparently a Ebola outbreak just broke out in the Congo, which is a little interesting too.
Right?
Yeah, that's completely off topic, but that just just popped up on my phone. Just a weird notification. Anyway, uh,
I think we should go back to the topic.
yeah, let's get back
Um,
to the topic. Just crazy things are happening all the time.
yeah.
But
Um,
we were talking about civics and political knowledge, and the reason why that's important because it's how you make political decisions. It's how you make informed decisions, and it was who was it? Was it like Socrates or whatever? But it was like a ancient philosopher who was talking about how an informed democracy is like you probably actually will know more about this
I
than
actually don't know this.
and I'll stop referring to him because I don't want to misquote him because he might I don't know. Well, he can't do
Come
anything.
back from the grave.
Yes,
No.
yes, yeah. But anyway, it was just a point about how an informed democracy is obviously the best democracy, and that
Mhm.
that's the only sort of way for it to govern itself. Because we kind of get situations like this, and I know it's an audio only podcast, but when I said this, I fluttered my hand in the air as if it was a majestic, queen referring to the world around. But it was more of just like everything that's happening right now, which is insane. But anyway, there's a real breakdown in political knowledge when you tie it to education, right? And so the there's like a disparate difference, and it's kind of huge. And so I'll just get into that. Where the same study from this would have been from peoplepress.org basically says that 45% of those with a post-grad degree on a high level have a high level of civic knowledge. So postgraduate degree, that's like basically Postgraduate is like MBA, MS, MA,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so then
PhD, like
yeah,
JD, etc.
let's just list all of them. And then 11% less, right? So there's an 11% decrease once you get to college graduates, right? So you only have a bachelor's degree. And then
Mhm.
there's an 11% decrease. Wow, 11%, 11%, 11%. There's an 11% decrease when you get to just some college experience, so likely college dropouts. And then an 11% decrease when you get to people with no college experience. So to
Mhm.
put that number, that means that 12% of those with no college experience have political knowledge, which is like almost disturbingly small, right? And I'm not faulting the people without the college experience. I also don't, but I don't think it's correlated in the sense of like, I don't think you learn anything in college necessarily that teaches you about civics, but I think it's just that this is my interpretation of it. So it may be true, may not be true, and I'd love to hear what you think. But it's
Mhm.
like I think if you're just on that path of getting more education, and whether that means if you're financially like it's possible for you, and just if that's like a real priority in your life, then I think you'll also just happen to be more motivated to be politically aware.
Mhm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I was also thinking along the lines of more like financial ability to really like pay attention.
Yeah, yeah,
And when you think about it, just how do we stay informed? Like, or at least how do I stay informed? Um, just reading New York Times, reading New Yorker, AP News, etc. Um, and those cost money. Like my school pays for the New York Times subscription, but now,
still costs money, right? I mean, like that's the kind of difference.
yeah,
Yeah,
and even like cable news costs money, and
yeah,
not even that. It's just also having the ability to have time and make that part of my routine. Whereas again, not everyone can do that, and also just like the you see with and you see this sort of like politics as a sport with those who are more financially independent and more like who don't really have to treat it as sort of a like small decisions will determine how much I'll make this year, or like even bigger than that, how much like whether I'll be able to have food stamps or not
yeah,
this year.
for sure.
Um, Wealthier people, of course, just can treat it as a sport because it's sort of this question of values rather than question of um, the comfort in life.
Yeah, I mean, almost weirdly, it would be like actually not weirdly, right? It would be better for people who have less of a who don't have a college education to be more politically aware because those decisions almost impact them more, right? If you're more
Mm-hmm.
wealthy, you almost have like a shield from most things,
Yeah.
and if you're less, then it's weird, right? Because like the impact is not always. I mean, it's probably more apparent to you than it is to me because I'm just less attuned to politics than you are. But like in the sense of like whenever there's a news story that's like Donald Trump has now taken money from this welfare fund and now put into this, you like register that and you're like, oh, that's horrible. But the the true impact of that, I don't think I like feel in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
That's like it's privileged and it's insane, but it's I think it's definitely important to kind of think about because
Mm-hmm.
that's the stuff I'm not.
But yeah, and I think this is like what does the media quite frankly boil down to right now? Like when you go into cable news, it takes this sort of like it doesn't actually talk about how this impacts you. And I think that's what Fox News at least is better than like CNN and MSNBC about doing.
Yeah,
They make it seem like the news of the day has real world consequences on you, whereas quite frankly, CNN and MSNBC and most of the like leftist media talks about it as this values. He's
yeah.
doing this. He's dishonest. When they still can't focus on
The actual,
this is how it's impacting people.
which is
And you see that with the coronavirus.
yeah,
Yeah, you see that with just his handling of the coronavirus pandemic. But quite frankly, they don't do it that well, and it's just a question. It caters to a better off audience that doesn't necessarily need to worry about this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, that's a very good point, because it's just something that like doesn't.
Makes sense.
It's also not even. I mean, to be fair to the media, it's not fun to read, right? Because sometimes it would be
Yeah.
depressing, and other times it would just be very, very dry, especially like this episode. But I think otherwise, I mean, like, what do you? But like the idea of packaging news with entertainment is just a little. It's just insane, right? I
It's
mean,
facetious.
it's
Yeah.
facetious. It's what leads to this, and yeah, I can't. Facetious. That's a good word. I'm no, but I mean, yeah, and let's continue with the sort of breakdown of civic knowledge. Now, prri.org. Let me figure out what that stood for before I just quote it, because that is the, yeah, Public Religion Research Institute. That they had done sort of an analysis of political activity. Now, political activity is another sort of set of political engagement that I think matters, because it's not just voting, but it's a lot of other things that are incredibly important that we're seeing right now. Right now, being during the sort of George Floyd protests and riots that are happening, and the coronavirus pandemic, and all these kind of crises, plural, basically, of crises that are there. And so these activities include, signing an online petition, boycotting something, posting on social media, liking or following a campaign, liking or following a campaign or organization,
Campaign organization.
donating money, contacting an elected official, volunteering for a group or cause, encouraging others to be politically active, attending a community meeting such as a school board or city council, and attending a public rally or demonstration. Now, Arman, my main question to you is,
No.
out of all of these, right? Now, I've highlighted this, so I think you can see it right on.
I can see it. Yeah.
I mean, this is an audio only thing. I have no idea why we're doing this. Is dumb. But on these, right, which one do you think is most important? And do you think that the share of the overall percentage of political activities that's dedicated to that activity, is that justified? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. I thought you were going to ask me which ones I've done. I was kind of scared.
I'll ask you that.
No. No, I think that's a really interesting question. Just which one's the most important? Ooh, that's a good one.
I mean, in my opinion, right, I think volunteering for a group or cause, contacting an elected official, like boycotting something.
I think that contacting an elected official, just because, like, quite frankly, unless you're in a position of power or prestige, it goes nowhere. You just talk to some staffer, and it's just like,
So is not important?
I've never done it, that being said. But I knew this one teacher who did, and it's just, yeah, you say things, even if you talk to an actual politician, they pretend to listen, and it's like nothing gets done with that. That's how I feel, of course, and I am a little bit cynical about that.
I've never even known about that, because I've always had this sort of idea in my mind that like they'd kind of listen. But I guess, why would a politician just up and out?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I guess it's a little weird then. But
I think that volunteering for a group or cause is definitely maybe not definitely, but it stands out in my mind.
Yeah.
Just as something you actually feel like you're making an impact. And I think when you do that, you feel not only like you're a part of something greater than yourself, but also just that you have to have some faith in the system to be able to do that, to give your time up for a candidate.
Yeah.
Again, whether they deserve it or not, that's a different question. And whether that actually makes it different or not is also who knows. But I think the just the feeling of trust to do that is, I wish we had more of that.
I agree with you. I think so. My intent behind the question was just sort of to talk about the things that I see a lot of people do, but I don't think actually does anything.
Yeah, I think like the online petition
Yes, that
and the like posting on social media.
because that's also so signing an online petition. Um, the way the order that I said those activities in is actually the order of biggest percentage to least. So
Hmm.
signing an online petition, the Public Religion and Research Institute found that 28% of the people that they interviewed did that. And that was like the number one sort of most popular political activity. It's easy, but it's also it's so filtered through, like you sign the petition, and if the petition gets enough signatures, then it gets sent to somewhere, and then if it matters, then like, and it's just,
Hmm.
it doesn't.
Well, certain petitions actually do matter. From what I know of early American history, um, like the right to petition was so important because certain laws, for instance, on the state level, you can vote on.
Oh, sure.
And in order to have that law be on in question is um, you have to have it like people signing that petition. And so what happened with the recent example of Florida felons being able to, or the question of their voting rights, people there was enough petitions to get that on the ballots that now didn't sign it into law, but it made the local legislature have to consider it. So I do think they have some importance. I
Yeah,
think beyond those,
you proven wrong, but well, now I feel silly.
no. But I think the vast majority of petitions are, oh, you're protesting Donald Trump's attack on, uh, I don't know, the Justice Department, which again, a important issue. But it's just you sign it and then you feel good about yourself and then you wipe your hands thinking, wow, I contributed
So,
to American democracy. I don't think that's necessarily the feeling you should get. And I think in order to make an impact, you have to give something of value. And by value, I like generally mean time. If you're giving your time up for something, whether it be through a protest or
yeah,
helping a politician is supporting your cause,
yeah.
that's a thing of value that would actually propel the idea forward.
I mean, is okay. So I guess my question is then, because then that kind of disproves my sort of cynicism, which is actually really nice. I have some go bad things. It kind of sucks, right? But um, I mean, it's nice to know that some petitions do matter, and I guess it's kind of silly assuming that they didn't. But then my question is then, like, those change.org petitions, like the ones that are online,
Yeah.
do those not matter? Or do those also?
I I don't think again the vast majority of them probably do not matter.
I see.
I don't remember what the actual like if you have to get the petitions for the instance I was talking about before with like the Florida law change. If you have to get that on paper, I don't think you do, but possibly. Um,
Oh, okay. And I guess the point of that is just to verify whether actually.
I have no idea. I want to put that out there. I have no idea. So do not take what I said with like even
No,
a grain of
yeah,
salt.
okay. Just,
Um,
okay.
the change.org petitions, I don't considering the spam my email.
It's, yeah, there's so many things that they want to change, and I'm just like, oof, it is a lot.
I think this gets down to just like making political change happen. I think, and this is a fringe idea I had, um, and I think we'll definitely talk more about this in like the episode where we talk about political fantasies. Um, but if every single voter had voted solely with their had said, hey, like, what is the most important issue to you,
Yeah,
and voted just based on that, of course, every voters would be there'd be a wide variety of issues that each voter would care about, but there would still be some consensus. And if each voter made decisions based on that, whether it be primaries, whether it be on general elections, whether it be like who they donate to, as in like which nonprofit they donate to or which campaign they help sacrifice their time for, I think we could see change because
what do you actually? I really want to talk about this because I mean, I know that the way you're probably thinking about this is like a systemize sort of like government-led effort, but I mean like technology kind of accomplishes a lot of things too. So you mean that like if it's sort of issues first, candidates second kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Or
Okay.
not even like issues first or candidates second. One issue and nothing else really mattering.
Could you run like like a sort of simulation of what this would look like?
Um, let's say my biggest focus is climate change.
Of course it is.
And I was voting in the Democratic primary in New York, which is actually going to happen in 2 weeks and 2 days.
Ooh,
Um,
nice.
it's-
Wait, you're mailing in your vote, right?
I am mailing in my vote, yes. Even if it's for the primary. But anyways,
Yeah.
um, I would choose Bernie Sanders based off numerous different climate change specific nonprofits rating his climate change legislation as the best or the most comprehensive. I
Mhm.
would under no circumstances vote for Joe Biden because his was, I think, an F minus from the, or F from the, I think it's the Sunset Movement or Sunset Group.
Sunlight Foundation? No.
Sorry,
Was it the Sunlight
it's
Foundation?
uh, poss.
That's a political data like.
There is, yeah. So you would essentially put your trust, and I will admit there is a degree of trust you have to have into certain, whether it be journalists or like analysts, to focus on their actual plan for change and determine which one's
Sunrise
best.
movement.
Sunrise Movement, yes.
Yes.
Joe Biden had an F for his climate change legislation in the primary. Whereas I think Bernie Sanders had the best, if I'm not mistaken. And then followed by Elizabeth Warren. And so I would vote entirely based on that as a voter. And other voters, for instance, who cared about, let's say, electability, for instance. I don't know if actually that's not an issue.
Oh yeah, electability is such a hard. I mean, like it's such a confusing metric to me because
Yeah.
it's like you have to vote for someone who's most likely to get votes, and it's like, why would you?
Yeah.
It is
Okay,
more-
let's say a contextualist judiciary.
That was.
Let's say that's my.
Look at me. What does that mean? I'm an
Well, no,
idiot. What
just
does that mean?
we talked about this earlier, I believe. Just
No,
the idea of reading the Constitution as it is.
no, but a judiciary? What is that?
The judiciary is in like judicial body,
Oh,
as
so
in the like
you're talking like,
having judges who are going to read the Constitution as it is. Let's say that's my
oh,
singular
oh, I see,
focus.
I see.
Let's
Okay,
say that's my biggest priority. I'd vote for Donald Trump.
sure. Okay, because that would sort of go for your advantage.
Or like Mitch McConnell, for instance.
Yeah, that makes sense.
First of all, it would like help explain to people why they are voting and also what issues people care about. And it would also turn the question away from more like sound bites and just hope as a campaign slogan to actual genuine goals and legislative proposals. Like one of the really great things I love about just this campaign cycle was how much of a focus it was on just measuring how just the different interpretations of issues and just the different proposals on different issues. If you cared about UBI, for instance, by all means vote for Andrew Yang.
Yep. Sorry. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Is that the only? But I feel like that's such a limited kind of way to. I mean, I like that idea because by leading with issues, you are sort of. I'm all for the kind of the de-emotionalization, which is not a word, but now it is a word.
We'll make it one.
Making words over here, but the sort of the like reduction of emotion basically in the political process, because I think of that. I think the political process is important, and I think taking as much human creativity out of it is like great. But But like, is that the only thing you can do? I feel like if you just lead with, why just lead with one issue?
Well, I think like the hope would be that, let's say, like my second biggest, okay, my first one's climate change, my second one's criminal justice.
Sure.
Hopefully someone else would have that as their priority, and
Right.
then environmental
Oh,
or like climate change is a second. So that's the goal and hope with it. Again, this has been nothing more than a political fantasy of mine that I thought was interesting, and like I never actually thought about like testing it out
let's do it.
in a future episode. Woo.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like the idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, there needs to be more efforts, and I'm going to actually go into this a little bit later because there's a lot of stuff there, and we can definitely talk about it about just the education of people and the education of the sort of democratic body and how amazing that would be because there's just not that much of a concerted effort to do it, unfortunately.
Mhm.
So anyway, with political activity, it's yeah, with political activity, I think we've sort of gone through a lot of that. I don't know, like Americans are generally more likely to politically engage online, right? Whether that means liking a campaign or following something or whatever, and whether it's effective or not is, I mean, to me in my mind, it was a flat no, but I guess now it's being a little different. It's a little different,
Mhm.
I guess, which is nice. I don't know. What do you think about the whole like following a campaign online, posting stuff online? Like, do you think that's actually useful?
Um, as someone who like whose only social media is like a LinkedIn and a Facebook, and it was, I think, like I used to have a Twitter
What
where I
an
did follow politicians. Hmm?
That would be just such a funny personality. Like my favorite social media platform is LinkedIn. No, but no, I think that's totally valid. I mean, like
Mhm.
it's good to not have a social media, honestly.
I used to have a Twitter and I used to follow politicians, and I think it felt shallow because I
Yeah,
thought I was going to be engaging with them directly and seeing what they had to say without any filters. They didn't say much,
and
and
you,
what they did say was like within the like how much is the character limit? Like 300 characters,
I think now it's 280. So yeah, basically,
basically.
yeah.
It just felt like, quite frankly, fake.
Yes,
Um,
yeah.
and that being said, I also did like this past year. I attended an event with Chris Murphy, who was the Democratic senator from Connecticut, a town hall he had, and it was not like a raucous like Trump campaign rally. It was just you go ask a question, and you can hear others ask questions, and you can sit down. Um, and it felt like that was actually where I heard more about the senator himself. I think I was following his Twitter back then, but I felt like I actually got a little bit of a sense of like what his guiding goals and principles were. Um, I think this was over the course of an hour and a half or two, but hearing him without any sort of like preparation, well, without any sort of campaign staff telling him how to appeal to young millennials or um, anything of the sorts, it was really interesting hearing him just give his most straightforward answer. Yes, a lot of it was uh, how a politician speaks, but it felt a little bit more genuine.
Yeah, no, for
There were
sure.
a lot of older, like there were, I think it was almost entirely older people, and by that I would say like no, there was like only a few students, and it was like kind of interesting just being in that environment, um, where I feel like these people were really trying to learn as much as they could instead of just hearing the person's or the politician's campaign slogan. Because you have to think these like older people voted when Twitter didn't exist. Like that's just such a, or like when there wasn't the cable news dominance of like, or the split between like Fox News and CNN and MSNBC. Like they knew what politics was like before it became this dystopia. Like I'm assuming they're
I mean,
voting
it's a
like
little, yeah, it's really hard to sort of envision that because, I mean, like when you bring it up, it doesn't seem so revolutionary because it's history, but But it is kind of crazy because, like, it's kind of taken for granted. But I guess politicians, depending on which party they're on, they have their own sort of like, broadcast, like speaker. And
Hmm.
I guess in the past they definitely didn't, unless you were Ronald Reagan at that one debate moment. There's a political reference.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, no, otherwise, no. But
Like these guys, like they voted in like maybe Reagan versus Carter is too old. When was that?
Reagan versus Carter is like 1980s.
So not that bad. That's only like 40. Yeah, that's only 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Like a 60-year-old would have been 20.
Yeah, so he very likely could have done it.
Yeah, that's just so fascinating to hear. Like think about.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. Especially because when you think about it, like, yeah, I mean,
Like it makes sense why these people would be the most, like as some of the other polling suggested. Older people are much more, first
educated.
of all, educated. They
Yeah.
have better turnout, um, and like of course because they don't know what it's like to only have like to go through this sort of like distrust of of politicians as much
Oh,
as young people has
I'll
too.
be honest. My sort of reasoning for that was always that, like, I just thought old people had more time. No, but I think
I never really put too much thought into it until now.
no, but that's
Um,
definitely more likely as the reason why, because it just makes a lot more sense that like politicians would, or sorry, that old people would, uh, I don't know, have more trust in the system.
yeah, I feel bad calling them like old people because if anything, they're just like wise people.
No, 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 no. I think sometimes I don't think we need to be on a pedestal. I don't want to be put on a pedestal because I'm old. When I'm old, I would like to like. There's some old
Oh,
people.
I mean the more like the older slash like more politically engaged slash active person.
I mean, they don't. But okay, but they don't all. I don't.
Okay, fair.
I don't know. I don't want to like idolize anyone or anything just for something that they can't control. Like, I don't want to walk around and people are like, "Oh, you're so tall," and I'm like, "Oh yes, bow down." It doesn't make any sense. Like, but I do think though that like they are. I don't know. It always feels unfair whenever old people are kind of like demonized in a weird.
Yeah, but that's actually true considering like
I
even
think
just like
because sometimes at least the feeling that I get is that a lot of them voted for Trump, and so whenever I talk to like liberal people, they get very kind of irritated
yeah.
at that idea. And then there's this sort of general consensus that as you get older, you get more conservative.
Hmm.
Um, but also, like, I don't know, you also get kind of it's weird because in your mind, at least in my mind, I think that like as you're getting older, wouldn't you be less involved politically? Because why would you?
Because it
And
has less of an impact on you as it does with a young person. Like for a young person, this is
this
like
is the
decisions about like college debt, for instance, and like
yeah,
student loans. That's their entire life.
yes,
Whereas like an older person's done with that, hopefully. Um, well, I think like for example with the
protocol.
COVID-19 pandemic, um, like Trump's approval rating amongst older people has actually he is now losing to Joe Biden on
Well, he should. He totally should on that because he's
that.
endangering them, right? Like
Yeah,
that's.
but I think it's like interesting. Just like maybe it's they don't care about, and again, this is a broad generalization, but maybe it's they become more conservative because they don't need to worry about having a safety net because they no longer have to worry about it. They
I
are
like
collecting
this.
pensions,
Yeah. Okay.
possibly, of course. That's just a thought I'm
No, I
throwing
think
out
that
there.
that's very likely. I think it makes a lot more sense. You
Because I
probably
don't think it's so much the like cultural, like the cultural conservatism. I think that's more
well, I think
like
that
that
happens
leads.
anyway, right? Because when you get older, your world sort of the world around you sort of changes, right? And so you're just not used to what's happening.
Mhm. Okay, that's fair. I think like I hate using the term like economic liberal and like, or economic conservative, and then like, oh, fiscal conservative, my bad, and social liberal. Like, I think fiscal and like liberal, fiscal and social don't really make sense in those contexts to me personally.
Oh,
Um,
why not?
what I think, like, could you necessarily call the expansion of the social safety net? Like, I think the expansion of the social safety net should be what social, uh, what you mean by social, politically social.
Well, I mean, like I know that you are technically correct, and like I think that a lot of people, if you broke down what you're saying, they would agree with you. But like you know what people mean
Yeah,
the social.
I think I would rather see it revised as um, cultural.
Yes, I think that's fair because then like social kind of includes like like civil rights and like
Mm-hmm.
LGBT. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
LGBTQ. Yeah.
Yes, and just a bunch of sort of civil issues. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like civil issues and then economic issues, and so those are
Mm-hmm.
the sort of two
Yeah.
dividers, or well, it's one divider, two things that I kind of see.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. I think you're right about the fiscal part of it, where I never really thought about that because it didn't totally make sense to me why someone would suddenly start becoming more fiscally conservative. But I guess if you now have money that you've accumulated, you
Mm-hmm.
probably don't want to give it away almost. Like you
Yeah, and
favor lower taxes and everything. Makes sense.
mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah, I think that's just an interesting like.
yeah, you're probably going to read Ayn Rand. Ahead of the
I
curve.
guess that's also a point too. Just like Reaganomics and like Ayn Rand were in this, well, like mid slash late 1900s. Maybe that also
Oh
has
my
a
God,
problem, like
wait,
an
is
effect
that
on it.
old?
Hmm?
Wait, when is that book? Oh,
Ayn Rand came out in the.
well, okay. First of all, this is let the author.
She died in 82, and then the Fountainhead was written in. Oh,
Oh,
the Fountainhead was written in 43,
43.
but
Yeah.
Atlas Shrugged was written in 57.
Wow. Now that's funny.
For those of you who do not know, Ayn Rand is this.
Objectivist
But what
philosopher.
does that even mean? This philosopher who got into, who this ethical philosopher who saw capitalism as the best ethical framework for society.
Yes.
We could do another like whole episode on
Yeah,
her.
I mean, the
She's
point of bringing up Ayn Rand is like, so she's also something that like she's a very weird figure in conservatism because a lot of conservatives will say they support her, but then I have a strong feeling that they haven't read her books.
yeah.
And like, because like Mark Cuban is like one guy who'll say like, when I need to get motivated, I'll open up the Fountainhead and read that book and I'll get really motivated. But like for like 80% of the book, it's just the main character like losing all the time. I don't understand what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But I guess I mean like yeah, capitalism as an ethical framework is a good way to put it. The idea of like I don't know, rugged individualism is kind of what I was
Yeah.
thinking of, where it's like you've got like it's the idea of like there are a couple people that are sort of the movers and shakers of the world, and
Hmm.
everyone else kind of depends on them. Where are we? What are we doing?
No, we were just explaining about like how older people tend to vote more conservative.
Yes.
Um,
Oh, and then I made that. Oh, I'm sorry. That was my fault. Yeah. No, but anyway, yeah, we will probably talk about objectivism in another episode because
who
that's
knows?
whatever. But anyway, yeah, older people go that way, and um, anyway, back to the sort of political activities and engagement. 45% of
Well,
those.
actually, I think just one more point I want to make.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I guess like who necessarily feels left behind by the political process? Like, and I guess we kind of talked about this earlier, but just like older people have already had enough time to kind of like secure their prosperity
Yeah.
and secure their own comfort in their old age. Was like young people still have that uncertainty, and so I think there are younger people and even just like the more like middle-aged people who still feel left behind by the political process and who feel left behind just by like how they will actually be able to like live in the next year.
Yeah.
They like pensions are a huge social like comfort for old people. Not everyone has that. It's kind of the UBI of old people. That's more of a joke than like, though it's kind of true.
No, I mean it's not completely untrue. It's just it's a different system for sure. But yeah, I mean I think it's kind of true.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, like the research, essentially, we can go through it step by step. But
I think the conclusions like we're making are more interesting, just in like.
Yeah, I mean, like the most important point is that like there's not really as much of a division as you'd expect in political engagement and political knowledge when it comes to political parties. Like, so if you're a Republican or a Democrat, you probably know as much. And even though, you know, as a Democrat, I think people would love to believe that like the other side is stupid and everything, and vice versa. It's not true. They usually just know as much as each other, but they just and that's completely fine. I always think of like Scott Adams for some reason. He always comes to mind as like a conservative who's just really against liberals in that way, and so in that kind of thing, I think it's very interesting to see. But there's a difference in sort of like the feeling of being represented, and that's an important one because that's kind of, and this is just sort of it's usually like a difference of 10% at each level when I say this, but it's like depending on what level you are, so be it your local, your state, and national, the difference in whether you feel you're being accurately represented is there, right? So
wait, can you just elaborate on what you mean by the different like
so basically it's about like, you know, about 46% of people believe that they that the state or local level politicians accurately represent them, but then at a national level it's like about 44%, and it goes down to sort of, well, yeah, I mean that's basically what I mean. And it's not a stark difference, but the point is that the representation kind of, the confidence in your representation
decreases as like I guess the bigger the government goes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I guess like how far it is away from you.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting then. I think that kind of makes sense. And I think I think even just the differences of powers of like local and local versus state versus federal government, there like the differences in like what they can actually do is really interesting. And I think maybe, I don't know, I guess like we're seeing that now with like the coronavirus pandemic, just like who gets the blame for this. And so I guess I'm curious to know how all this really like changes our views of it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think generally I don't know. I mean, it's hard to sort of put all of these things together. I don't know. Coming into this episode, I thought it would be cool to go through the sort of statistics of everything, but I think it's a little misleading because it seems like it'll give you a better picture of what's going on, but generally,
they just only make it more confusing.
Yeah,
I think it just adds layers. Like you can't view any of this really as just like just as a numbers game. I think there is more of like a human side to this than numbers could ever represent.
Yeah,